All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Young Neurosurgeons NREF webinar. This is our first episode of 2022. The topic of the day is neurosurgeons impacting the world. And while there are so many neurosurgeons impacting the world, we selected 3 to give you a small sampling of what may be going on. And I'm really excited to introduce everyone to you. I'm sorry if there's noise behind me. I'm in the hospital, so I can only control so much of the background noise. I did want to kind of go through a little bit about the series that we've put together here. This is the Young Neurosurgeons NREF web series with the goal to provide students, residents, and young neurosurgeons with timely information and education and inspiration towards the career in neurosurgery. So what is the Young Neurosurgeons Committee? You see this acronym. It's a committee of the AANS that provides representation to the AANS leadership and many of the committees and sections within the WFNS and organized neurosurgery. We develop future leaders of neurosurgery and provide a channel for young neurosurgeons to impact the direction of neurosurgery through organized neurosurgery. So then what is the WFNS? It was founded back in 1931. It's called the American Association of Neurological Surgeons. It's a scientific and educational association with more than 10,000 members worldwide. I think it's significantly more than that now. It's an organization that guides the field of neurosurgery, and its roles include education, advocacy, and promoting the highest quality of patient care. And then, of course, what is NREF? Since it's the Young Neurosurgeons NREF webinar. So it stands for Neurosurgery Research and Education. It's a non-for-profit 501c3 organization created by the WFNS. It supports basic science, clinical research, as well as lifelong education and improved outcome for our patients. One of the many things it does is put on a lot of really excellent courses for residents to learn techniques, as well as funds a lot of resident research that has been then yielded many millions of dollars of NIH funding for neurosurgical projects and patients' outcomes. So thank you to NREF for sponsoring this webinar. Before we move on, we do have another webinar in just a few weeks, which is going to be the origins of neurosurgery, where Dr. Daggy, who's in charge of the history section, is going to talk about this topic. And we're going to have another one of the history section leadership, as well as the neurosurgery panel, to discuss some of these really interesting topics about how the history of neurosurgery can inform us today and our future. So please join us for that. That's the QR code if you want to go ahead and sign up. Of course, always follow us on social media. You can hear more about all these things. We also record this session and put it on YouTube, and we'll announce that on social media when it happens. All right, for our panelists today, we have 3 distinguished members of the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. Carolyn Quincy is Assistant Professor, Associate Program Director at UNC Neurosurgery. She also has an extensive background in international neurosurgery, so we'll be interested to hear from her after our speakers. Whoops. Nitin Agarwal, he's a Complex Spine Fellow at UCSF, also a longstanding member of our committee, and we're excited to have him here. And Sophie Peters, who's a neurosurgery resident at UCLA, and hopefully she will be out of clinic shortly and can join us if she hasn't already, and knows a lot of the folks on this committee and does a lot of international work as well. So we're excited to have everyone from our panel here. As far as our guests, we have 3 outstanding guests. Dr. Gail Rosseau, who you see is very accomplished. She is a professor of neurosurgery at George Washington University Department of Neurosurgery. She has a background with her education at medical school and neurosurgical residency at George Washington University. She has extensive fellowship training in skull-based surgery, both in Paris, France, as well as University of Pittsburgh. She has multiple international leadership roles, including WFNS, which is the World Federation of Neurological Surgeons Foundation, Director of Think First, which I believe is a head injury and concussion nonprofit. She's on the executive board for the Foundation of International Education in Neurosurgery and the board of directors for SNCLF, which I'm not going to try and butcher the name in French. Dr. Rosseau, welcome.
Thanks
Yeah, go ahead. Then Dr. Copeland. So Dr. Copeland is a young neurosurgeon. He is full-time working at Tenwek Hospital in Bomet, Kenya. Again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering the name. He went to medical school at University of Arkansas, neurosurgical residency at Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And then his leadership role includes training the residents at Pan-African American Christian Surgeons training program that I believe he established, and we'll hear about that at Tenwek. So welcome, Dr. Copeland. And then finally, Ms. Kristen Huntoon. So she is a neurosurgical fellow at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. Her education is at a medical school at NYIT College of Osteopathic Medicine, neurological surgery residency at Ohio State University, and a current fellow, as we said. Her leadership roles include Public Relations Committee Chair at Physicians for Criminal Justice Reform and Associate Editor of Journal of Neuro-Oncology. Kristen, very happy to have you. Thank you for joining us. All right. And then we want to always thank the people that work so hard behind the scenes. Anna, who is a medical student in Mexico, who's one of the founders of this webinar series, always does a lot of hard work, creates the posters and does a lot of the logistics, as well as our amazing NREF liaison, Rebecca Struer. Oh, how do I say it again, Rebecca?
Sawyer.
Sawyer. I always get her last name wrong. I promised I wouldn't this year. Very good. We should have practiced that in the prelude. So I just want to thank both of them for their incredible service to our webinar, and big hand clap and thumbs up virtually. Thank you both. All right, from there, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Rosseau to give us a little talk about some of the exciting things going on at International Neurosurgery. And I stop screen sharing and let her take it away. While she does that, please, any questions you come up with, just put them in the Q&A. It's a little bit challenging to see the hands raised during the chats, but we'll answer the questions as we go, typically after the speakers have spoken. But please put them in there, and we'll see them and answer those that we can, and ask others to our speakers after they're done presenting.
Great. Can you see the slides?
I cannot.
Okay, let's try that again then. Let's see. I might have jumped in early. Let's see.
Now I can. Now I can see your desktop.
Okay, good. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. What a pleasure to be asked to be on such a distinguished webinar, and with people that I really enjoy and admire in the panel as well. I'm lucky to be going first, and I'm going to do a very rapid overview, lots of slides, but I'll have my contact information at the end, and of course it'll be recorded. But it's so important to me that the young neurosurgeon community know about where this is coming from and where it's going, because they're the engine who are powering it. So what a great pleasure. Let me get started. These are the topics I want to go over, and you'll see it self-explanatory. So global neurosurgery is different than international neurosurgery. I'm a big vexillologist. I love flags, and neurosurgery has always been international. But we're not talking only about internationalism. We're talking about this. Global surgery being the clinical and public health practice of surgery with a special purpose, which is to ensure timely, safe, affordable surgical care to all who need it. And it's surprising often to some of us who devote our lives to surgery that the public grasping that this is not an unaffordable luxury is fairly recent. And then we were talking as we were gathering about what drives people, what motivates people to go into global surgery. And very often they're an interest in human rights. And you'll hear more from others about this. Well, I hope that what you'll take from these slides is the idea that you can help the global neurosurgery effort through any position. And that starts with the World Bank Challenge, which was issued by World Bank President Jim Kim, who really changed everything because it was the first time there was a physician running the World Bank. He issued a challenge to the surgeons that he knew to prove the economic case for why countries should not consider surgery an unaffordable luxury, but should invest in the country and their own country's surgical services. And from that, the Lancet picked up that challenge, and after a rigorous 2-year period, in April of 2015, published this landmark report, which was their commission report on global surgery. And these are the 5 key messages. They're quite astounding. 2/3 of the population, 5 billion people with a B, lack access to surgical care. That means that every year there are 143 million operations, emergency and essential in nature, that are not being done. The catastrophic costs that are faced by tens of millions of people are incredible. An investment, however large it may be, pays for itself. And the conclusion of all is that surgery is an indispensable and indivisible part of healthcare. Many nations have not devised their healthcare system to be that way. At any rate, talk about a high impact paper that was published in April of 2015, and in May of 2015, 1 month later, there was a unanimous resolution at the World Health Assembly to strengthen emergency and essential surgical and anesthesia care. And that's the tipping point. So that's why you're seeing so much that's happened since just 2015, because that was the point after which all nations had a public reporting requirement at the level of the WHO as to what they're doing about surgery. Well, why should we who love neurosurgery care about global surgery and neurosurgery? Well, there's really been a change in our culture, and young people feel it. In fact, young people are driving it. There's very broad participation now in global surgery, which is being both requested by the junior members of our community and embraced by seniors. So much so that I believe that there is now an additional core responsibility for neurosurgeons, and that is beyond taking the best possible care of each patient, which we've always considered our core responsibility. We now have a duty to advocate for access to high quality neurosurgical care for everyone, everywhere. And that's what this is all about. So I'm going to go through a number of organizations because this is really meant to be a way to get involved if you want to be involved. And one is the G4 Alliance, and that is the G4 stands for the 4 surgical disciplines, the so-called SOTA disciplines: surgery, obstetrics, trauma, and anesthesia. And this is a way that surgeons are going into the major public policy areas that we have in the world. Here's just an example of what we planned at the United Nations General Assembly last year. So we're getting beyond preaching to the choir of other surgeons who say, yes, surgery is important, and talking to ambassadors and ministries of health to make a difference. The UN has sustainable development goals, and affordable access to surgery fits squarely within them. But you can see on this map of the world, if I just say that the warm colors are places where there is a critical lack of surgical care, you can see why Will is where he is, and why so many of our efforts in global surgery are addressed to LMIC, or low and middle income countries. Neurosurgeons are involved in policy, and every year we have a delegation of neurosurgeons now who attend the World Health Assembly, which occurs and has occurred in the 3rd week of May in Geneva every year since the United Nations was formed. And in fact, we have a 2nd-year medical student who is delivering a resolution on behalf of global surgery on Thursday. 2nd-year med student. So this is something that's very exciting. It's a great opportunity to use one's clinical skills and policy skills to make a difference. And so she will be giving a report on why we as neurosurgeons believe we need a global mandatory folate fortification resolution in order to prevent spina bifida. There's other organizations like UNITAR, which is trying to raise funds for global surgery. Take a minute to look at this slide. It's quite shocking when you realize how very little money is spent globally on surgery. Look at the annual budget for HIV, malaria, and AIDS. That's the budget of the WHO, much of which comes from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The budget of the WHO for surgery is exactly zero. And yet, look how many surgically avertable deaths there are. So we need to right size our global system. And Here's another way you can get involved if you're someone who likes to write. We're publishing op-eds and letters in the New York Times and the Washington Post calling for change here. So there's been a change in culture as surgical specialties ramp up to address these urgent needs. And I'm going to just very quickly go through what some of these are. So we as surgeons, if you're board certified, you can become a member of the American College of Surgeons, which has a foundation called Operation Giving Back, which is very robust, great way to give back. You can, as you advance through, when you're a board examiner, you can give board exams at the College of Surgeons of East, Central, and Southern Africa, where they're looking to have quality exams that are on par with the rest of the world. The American College of Surgeons has a women's scholars program with COSEXA, or there's a broad-based group that includes all women involved in surgery, including surgical nurses and nurse anesthetists. That's called WISA, and we help fund scholarships there. So global surgery is rapidly becoming an emerging focus for individual surgeons and for surgical departments. And let me just run through some of the academic, professional association, governmental, faith-based, and industry ways you can get involved. So when the Duke University started their School of Public Health, they asked a neurosurgeon, and John Harwood, who's a MSNBC reporter, to talk about public policy because there is so much going on that is being driven by surgeons these days. At Harvard, the program in global surgery and social change, led by John Mira, we have all kinds of people involved who are coming from LMIC, learning about how to do good policy and bring it back to their country. So we've developed things like this, studying the literature in a collaborative way so that we can advise ministries of health. How many neurotrauma centers do you have to have? What's the manpower requirement and so forth? You may want to be involved in programs like the one that we have. I'm on the NHS board for the steering committee that gives 30 million pounds to Cambridge University for this exact kind of program, which is looking at snapshots from around the world of who's being admitted for surgical trauma care and what their outcomes are. And there is a possibility to provide yourself with a career in this. Jim Rutka, who's the chairman of surgery now at the University of Toronto, has developed a tenure track in global neurosurgery, global ENT, global ortho, and so forth. Well, just take a look at this bar graph that Jim Kim showed when Dr. Kim was the Cushing orator the last time the AANS met in San Diego in 2019. And you can see that the number of papers that are being published in global neurosurgery is going through the roof. And we have champions in all of our journals who are editors who care deeply about that. We have very interested and involved senior neurosurgeons who are going into encore careers, planning the mid portion of their career in such a way that they will be able to give back afterwards. We have young faculty who are getting master's degrees and PhDs in public health. Here's something that these two residents have done that's going to help all young people, and that is that they were superb Fogarty Fulbright Fellows at the NIH doing global neurosurgery. And now that scholarship program is actively recruiting for more young neurosurgeons. We have people like Milagros Niquen Jimenez, a medical student in Peru who published the most cited article in global neurosurgery last year, second-year med student from Peru, and devised a program by which we can look to see where we need more neurosurgical papers to be done, because we don't know any of the outcomes from these countries. Now, we're so sorry to have recently lost William Hartness, who is the founder, along with Jim Johnston, of Intersurgeon. But after this take out your phone and sign up for intersurgeon.org, and you'll see that it's a just wonderful site for pairing people who have an interest in global surgery with a place that has needs for education or equipment. And the number of digital innovations are astounding and will be part of that kind of virtual hybrid program that we were talking about before. FIENS, the Foundation for International Education in Neurosurgery, is a clearinghouse for useful information that has kind of holds together more than 25 partnerships and is one of the largest funders of global surgery fellowships. So there are lots of opportunities for new leaders to emerge, some in person, some will be able to be new leaders through simulation. And I'm showing you examples of the sim labs in Lausanne, Switzerland, in Milan, and in Geneva, where we're welcoming international visitors. You can get involved through the WFNS and the Global Neurosurgery Committee that looks to have the global efforts of neurosurgical societies communicate well with one another so that our goals are aligned. And you can see what our progress has been in the last 2 years in amplifying access and all of these things. So you can go on the gnc.org website and see those details. But it's not only academic groups, it's not only neurosurgical professional association. Independent practitioners and institutes are doing remarkable work, whether it's Sarah Woodrow in Ethiopia, Rich Wones in Nepal and the Maldives, Edie Zussman, epilepsy programs in Nigeria, or Dylan Eligala, who's working in Africa. Individual neurosurgeons are making a huge difference. And our Spanish colleagues from NED in Valencia have even been able to create a hospital in Zanzibar. We had great opportunity to be involved in Sudan, and we're developing our program with them at a very high level. Spent time, a couple weeks with them this summer. Unfortunately, they had a coup at the end of October. So now we are working on making sure that they're safe and getting the word out about their democracy. We mentioned earlier spirituality and faith-based motivations, and there are great programs that one can become involved in. Solidarity Bridge, it has neurosurgical programs and brought the first boot camps to South America in Bolivia and Paraguay. And then our industry partners, many of our largest vendors have foundations, and there are ethical and responsible ways for them to do well by doing good with us. And our residency review committees have now allowed us to be able to count as elective credit the time that neurosurgical residents spend internationally. So the future of global surgery is very bright, and it's being driven by these med students and residents and people like them and the organizations that they represent, particularly Incision, which is in 65 countries. So I believe we have a responsibility to advocate for enhanced access to quality surgery, and in our case, neurosurgery, for everyone everywhere. And with that, I'll leave you with my contact information. Thank you for allowing me to share my passion with you.
Dr. Rosseau, that was stunning. I really appreciate you being able to give us that talk. It's amazing, amazing. I think what we're going to do as far as format wise is we'll just jump to our next speaker, and then we'll save the questions for the end. But I know I even have some. So if our panelists are short on some, I have some. So thank you for an amazing talk. Next, we're going to go to William Copeland, who will talk about his essentially his work that he's been doing for, I don't know how long now, William, like 5 years, 6, 7 years?
Yeah, going on 6 years.
Yeah, in Kenya. This is going to be interesting. So thank you for coming.
Let's see here. Can you see my screen?
Affirmative.
Okay. All right. Let's see. I guess yeah, there we go. Yeah, JJ, thanks a lot for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. Gail, I think what you just went through is really important and so helpful, especially for young neurosurgeons to see the breadth of opportunities available. I know that was something that I struggled to find, that graph you showed of the changes in publications of global neurosurgery over the last 5-6 years. Back in 2012, 13, when I first started looking into this, I hardly knew where to turn. So what you're doing and is really important. So thanks for that. If you'll allow me, I'd just like to share for the next few minutes about what I've been doing since finishing my residency training in 2016. As JJ said, my name is Will Copeland. This is my family, my wife Elisa, and our now 7 children. And in 2016, just a few months after finishing my neurosurgical residency at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, we moved to Bomet, Kenya, in the western part here, in a rural part of the country, to work at Tenwek Hospital. And at the time, we just had 5 kids. We've had 2 more since, both born here at Tenwek. And this most recent picture was taken just a few months ago at our oldest son, his boarding school. So something we never thought we'd do when we started having children, but he attends this boarding school a few hours away. JJ had asked me to talk about how I became interested in global neurosurgery. And this is a picture of my wife and I. Her father's there in the edge of the picture in Haiti. I think this was in college or medical school. I don't quite remember. We took several trips to Haiti. We were able to go to Mexico. We were involved in inner city work in Little Rock, Arkansas, where we grew up. And opportunities like this made us aware, gave us simply an awareness of how much of the rest of the world lives. And really, I think, fostered in us a desire to be a part of international and global efforts. So during my 5th year of residency at Mayo, we had some elective time. I had completed all my required clinical rotations. I frankly didn't really care much to be in a lab. And so I was looking for opportunities to see what neurosurgery might look like in a developing country. The Mayo Clinic has an international health program where they partner with a number of hospitals across the globe. And I kind of thumbed through all those, and none of them had a neurosurgeon at them. But one of the graduates from Mayo was serving at a hospital called Tenwek in Kenya. And I was doing some spine surgery. And so I reached out to him, and he said, yeah, in fact, we've got also some neurosurgeons that visit, for a week or 2 a year, and we could time one of your visits with them. And so that's what I did. I went out as a 5th year resident and spent a month at Tenwek. And it was quite literally a life-changing experience for me. At the time I was applying for fellowships, beginning to discuss with others about different job opportunities. Really, the prospect of serving long-term internationally was completely off of our radar. We thought that, much like growing up, we might take our family for a week a year and serve somewhere, but was not at all thinking about doing what we're now doing. One of the things, another thing JJ asked me was, well, why in the world would you do such a thing? Take your family and just a few months after finishing residency, move to a place like Kenya. And oh, sorry, these are just a few pictures to you, but so the why really focuses around 2 things. One is the need. When I was in Kenya during that month, I was struck by the degree of poverty and sickness that I saw, and for the first time, really was able to appreciate tangibly how, as a neurosurgeon, I might be able to use my skills to address and be a part of efforts globally. And so, I saw guys like Joseph here who came in with a ruptured aneurysm that we were able to fix, or Flossie, who was assaulted and had this spine fracture that we were able to fix. Or you've got a young boy like Gideon, who came in with a monster meningioma that we were able to take out. And these are all patients who, frankly, if there were no neurosurgical care being offered at a place like Tenwek, they're unable to access or afford care in some of the bigger cities, and so would literally go home to suffer or die. And that sounds dramatic, but it's true. So that was certainly a strong motivator for me. If you'll allow me just briefly to put on my preacher hat, Gail alluded to some faith-based efforts, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that perhaps the strongest motivator for my family, and really the strongest motivator, is our desire to imitate Jesus Christ. As a follower of him, we feel like he was someone who cared about the poor and the sick and the neglected, and so to try and serve others like he did is certainly a large motivator for us. So what is life like here? This is myself and Weldon. Weldon is a clinical officer, really the equivalent of a physician assistant. And for the first couple of years I was here, it was just the two of us. He was kind of my right-hand man. And when I first came in 2016, there had never been a full-time neurosurgeon here at Tenwek, and so much of the equipment and infrastructure that so many of us are used to was not here. This is me trying, unsuccessfully, I'll say, to do a direct carotid puncture to diagnose an aneurysm in a patient that presented with subarachnoid hemorrhage. This is the operating microscope that I had for the first year that I was here, an old dental microscope that was tucked away in a corner of the hospital, and you can see it attaches to the edge of the bed, and there's this fixed focal length and no observer tube. So, everyone in the room falls asleep when I start to operate under the microscope. This was room 6. So room 6 was one of the original operating rooms here at Tenwek, and it had largely been abandoned, functioned for minor surgeries, washouts and things, kind of a place to store junk. And in the main theater area, myself and the general surgeons and orthopedists were all sort of, getting each other's way. And I said, look, if you'll give me room 6, I'll get out of your hair. And so they said, well, sure, nobody wants room 6. So they gave me room 6, and with a bit of sweat equity and stuff, we were able to turn it around, make it a reasonable place. And in fact, today we have much of the equipment necessary for any of you. If you walked into our operating room, I think you would find yourself quite comfortable. We've got operating microscope and drills and all the implants and things that we need. As far as our annual volumes, we see about over 600 admissions per year, do over 450 major operations. This is our team now. It's no longer just Weldon and I. This is our team from the clinic and the ORs, and this was a recent picture last month. The case volume here is quite varied. Every day is different. You never know quite what's going to come through the door. About a quarter of what we see is trauma. And of course, the severity here of trauma is much different than I was used to seeing. About a quarter of what we do is pediatrics. And about a quarter is spine, both infectious and degenerative, in addition to trauma. And then about a quarter of what we do is cranial, both tumors, some spine tumors here, and vascular work. This is a picture of my family, as far as what our family life is like. We do homeschool here. So this is kind of the end of the year celebration. We get to go on safari. Here's a big rhino behind us. We have babies. If my wife knew I was showing you this picture, she would kill me. We have, bone fractures. So this is my son. He fractured his radius, and a couple of my Kenyan colleagues reducing it. We have Christmas trees. We make homemade Pop-Tarts. We get care packages from the US with chocolate chips and pepperoni and things we can't get here. We take baths in different ways. But finally, the last question JJ asked is, well, what impact do you think you're having? What motivates you to stay? And as I've already shared a bit about, certainly a strong motivator is the patients. Folks that, again, were we not here and our team not here, would not be able to access neurosurgical care. But perhaps, and really the most gratifying aspect of being here is the opportunity to train. This is all of the surgical consultants and residents here at Tenwek. At Tenwek, we train surgeons through an organization called the Pan-African Academy of Christian Surgeons, or PACS. It is an organization that has 17 training programs in 8 countries across Africa. Their graduates are now in 21 countries across the continent. We also train through, as Gail has already alluded to, COSEXA, the College of Surgeons of East Central and Southern Africa. It's a consortium of, I believe now 14 countries. And of those 14 countries, 7 of them have neurosurgical training programs, and these are those programs. This is yours truly back in 2017, sitting for the COSEXA. And that particular year, I was one of 5 neurosurgical graduates for the country, these 14 countries. Gives you just a glimpse of the need. This is a map of Kenya, and the red star is the COSEXA training program in the capital city of Nairobi. The yellow stars are some of the satellite rotation sites for the COSEXA residents in the country. And as of January 2020, one of the things I'm most proud of the time we've been here is that here in Bomet at Tenwek, we've been able to start the only independent COSEXA program outside of the capital. And it is the only PACS program, neurosurgical program in all of Africa. And so it's just been a great joy to be able to join the COSEXA trainers here in Kenya and start a program here at Tenwek. This is our current resident cohort. So next to me there on the left is Dr. Ivy Barasa. She is our first year neurosurgical trainee. And the way that the training works here is for the first 2 years, they do a lot of general surgical rotations. Next to her is Dr. Bethwell Rayore. He's actually an American, but grew up here in Kenya and was visiting us for a couple weeks earlier this year. Next to him, in the second from the right, is Dr. Emmanuel Wafula. He's our most senior neurosurgical resident. He's now the equivalent of a PGY5 resident. And finally, next to him is Dr. Josephat Mburu, a PGY4 resident. And as I already said, these guys and gals are really kind of the heartbeat of what we're doing here, and what gives me great satisfaction in what we're doing. So JJ, thanks again for the opportunity. I'm happy to take questions later, but a great honor to be a part of this panel.
And another spectacular presentation, Will. I think you do your remarkable story and your work there is tremendous. I have a lot of more questions also, but I'm going to hold them until after we hear from our final speaker. I think so hopefully we can get our slides up here. Kristen, let's see. All right, Kristen Huntoon is going to talk about her work with the Physicians for Criminal Justice Reform. Thank you so much, Kristen.
No problem. Thanks for, I don't feel worthy of this panel by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm so impressed with everyone's work. So I will just give a little sampling of what we've been doing with Physicians for Criminal Justice Reform. So I probably don't need to remind anyone of what's happened over the last couple of years, and not even just the last couple of years, but what we've been able to see on social media and the news. This is just a few of the individuals who have unfortunately lost their life in the course of interacting with our criminal justice system here in the US.
So at least for me, I'm just seeing like a single shot of like your intro slide.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is it still my intro slide?
For me, it is, yeah. Maybe unshare and then share again.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, maybe.
Okay, it's going to share again here. Yeah, click that.
Still intro slide?
Yes.
Huh. I am so sorry. Let's try this another way.
Okay. I can also try and make you a co-host here. 1 second, in case that helps.
Okay. Does it go to my second slide here?
Yes.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I don't know what that was about. Still second slide?
Yes, but it did not go to full screen. It's still on the, I'm not sure what you call that.
It's still on the, like,
Yeah, it didn't go to the presentation mode. Okay. If you need to, you can just maybe unshare and just do it on the non-presentation mode, because it seems to freeze every time you do it in presentation mode.
okay. Well, let's, sorry, I have not had these issues before. I don't know what's happening.
Technology.
I know,
Never
right?
know when it's going to bite you.
Today I've been bitten. I don't know why it's going.
But now we see a full screen. Yeah.
You do?
Mhm.
You see the next screen?
Yes. All right. You're good.
Cool. Fourth or fifth time is a charm. Okay. So, 2014, I probably don't have to paint the picture again. These, and it's not even the extent of the individuals who lost their life and interacting with our criminal justice reform, but it was many, many more than this. And this is how our founders were met at the moment, with lots of other organizations starting to work on this issue. So Black Lives Matter was founded in 2014. White Coats for Black Lives had one of the largest protests in US history since the Vietnam War, where they had die-ins. Rallies were started, Facebook groups and online media all started to galvanize towards this issue. So probably some of you know Dr. Nadam. He is one of the founders, along with his friend, and now my friend, Dr. Harrison, as well. And their conversation, basically, as many of us do, some of these things come from moments where, what can I do to be a part of this, and what can I do to change something about it? So they had started this conversation, and then Dr. Nadam knew of my background and knew that I was passionate about this and asked me to join the group as well. So about us, so we're a 501c3 organization founded by a group of physicians who were struck by the myriad of ways the negative encounters with the criminal justice system that led to detrimental health consequences. And we believe that changing this interaction between the criminal justice system and individuals of targeted populations will ultimately lead to improved health of those targeted communities. So again, we're physicians who are advocating to eliminate the damaging health consequences that can result from negative interactions with the criminal justice system. And we have 4 core issues. So they are to decriminalize mental health and addictive disorders, reform the juvenile justice system and to identify and avert at-risk adolescents, provisions of adequate access to physical and psychiatric health care of current inmates, and the reduction of violent encounters between law enforcement professionals and with the general public. So our members, we have a board, and then we have people in different committees. We all have made the commitment to be leaders in criminal justice reform by using our medical expertise. Some of us are neurosurgeons, some of us are in internal medicine in different groups. Luckily, Dr. knows lots of neurosurgeons who are increasingly wanting to be involved in this. We increase awareness and knowledge of bidirectional relationships between health and the criminal justice system, serve as a fund of knowledge, education, and training for local, state, and national health and justice systems, and advocate for criminal justice reform surrounding our core issues, which I'll go more into. So decriminalization of mental health and addictive disorders. So across the US, individuals with severe mental illness are 3 times more likely to be in jail or in prison than in a mental health facility, as our mental health facilities have closed in the US and it's not valued as much. Nearly 20% of prison inmates have a serious mental health illness, and 30 to 60% of prison inmates have a substance use disorder. An estimated 50% of males and 75% of females in prison, and 75% of females and 63% of males in jail will experience a mental health problem requiring mental health services in any given year. And despite 45 million drug-related arrests in the US, rates of addiction remain unchanged, And as we all know from all the daily headlines, overdose deaths are at an all-time high. What we also know is there's more and more hospital guards across the country that carry weapons. We see it when we go to the ED, we see it when we're walking through. And for individuals like Ellen Peen, who was trying to get help during a mental health distress, this resulted in a gunshot to the chest. So let's get some of the facts straight. So increasing access to mental health services is needed. According to APA, most violence is not perpetrated by persons with serious mental health disorders, despite what we hear otherwise. Research indicates that violent behavior attributable to mental health disorders only accounts to 4 to 5% of total violence. And individuals with mental health illnesses engaged in a regular treatment are considerably less likely to commit violent acts than those who are not engaged in appropriate healthcare treatments. Since this has happened, our organization has partnered with his family to advocate for the decriminalization of mental illness. So one of our other core issues is provision of adequate access to physical and psychiatric healthcare for current inmates. We know from studies that individuals age at a greater rate because they have substance use disorders and have inadequate preventive and primary care prior to and while they're incarcerated, and the stress-linked isolation, sometimes violent environmental prison system also does that. Prison inmates have a higher incidence of chronic infections and chronic diseases such as AIDS, hepatitis, and mental illness than the general population. And 66% of prisoners and 40% of jailmates with chronic conditions reportedly take prescription medication that they don't always have access to. One of our other issues that I was bringing up earlier as one of our 4 is reforming of the juvenile justice system to identify and divert at-risk adolescents. On any given night in the US, 10,000 children are held in adult jails and prisons, and as many as 70% of the youth in the juvenile justice system have a diagnosable mental health disorder. Youth housed in adult prisons are 36 more likely to commit suicide than those housed in a detention facility. And youth under the age of 18 represent 21% of the victims with inmate-on-inmate sexual violence in jails in 2005. And this is surprisingly much higher than the general population of 1%. Some people may remember this headline in the New Yorker. So Khalif Browder was he was brought to jail. He was brought to Rikers when he was 16 and spent 3 years there, despite multiple times insisting he did not commit the crime, and he never even was tried for this crime. And in February 2012, he took his own life after having multiple times where he had sole confinement. So one of our other goals is to reduce juvenile delinquency, increase juvenile offender accountability, and the rehabilitation of juvenile offenders through a comprehensive and coordinated community-based juvenile probation system. One of the other things that I brought up before is the reduction of violent encounters between law enforcement professionals and the general public. No one on this probably is not aware of the statistic of how high we see rates of law enforcement leading to deaths compared to other westernized societies. And we all know quite well the story of George Floyd and what has continues to be maybe the lack of direction that we have both at the national level, since those bills have not ignited enough energy. So JJ had asked about what we have accomplished through this organization. So I think one of the things we've accomplished is we've been able to educate not just other physicians, but been able to educate different organizations as well as individuals in actual police reform and that work in law enforcement. We've come up with advocacy tools, white papers, so that you can talk to your legislators and have the facts regarding the problems. And I don't know that we can claim it as a legislative win, but the age of criminal responsibility was raised both in New York and New York City, and we worked with the Campaign for Youth Justice for that. So why physicians? Why neurosurgeons? Why spend our evening talking about this? So the ACA proved the power of organized physicians, and we are experts, even neurosurgeons who may not remember everything about health, of determinants of health. Physicians' voice has been largely absent in this, along with the other conversations that we had. We need to use our voice not just to take care of our patients, but to advocate for them. We have a duty to advocate against those environmental factors that are negatively affect health and negative health consequences of criminal justice, justice reform. Criminal justice involvement are irrefutable, excuse me. And that is my presentation. Sorry for the delays at the beginning.
Thanks, Kristen. Another great presentation. I really appreciate all you guys focusing your work on trying to make common sense evolutions in our system where, we're presenting evidence and advocacy. So thank you for that. All right. I think these were outstanding presentations, which I learned a great deal from. And I want to yield to our panelists who have been so kind as to join us. Again, I'm going to probably go in order of seniority. So Carolyn Quincy, I know you've had a big role in yourself in international endeavors in neurosurgery. I was just so people out in the audience kind of get a flavor of what people in our committee are up to. Maybe just give a quick summary of what you've been doing. And if you have any other questions or comments you want to make about the prior presentations, that would be great.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I'm at UNC and we have a relationship in Malawi. And so we support the clinical group there and education as well. And we're on our way to have a fellowship for American residents in their research year to be able to work there, which halted with the pandemic, of course. And then also we have a relationship in Mauritania, which is a country in Northwest Africa, just south of Morocco. And they have just built a neuroscience center. And so we've been a part of trying to get them up and going and add quality improvement projects and research as well. And then we have a global case conference where we all get together, and it's a great opportunity for our residents and everyone to hear about resources in other countries and just different considerations of cases from each place. So I do have a question for Dr. Copeland. Here in the US, we with COVID, we suddenly have found ourselves finding what it is to be resource poor and to not be able to do the cases that we want to do because of staffing and et cetera. And that's something that you live every day, and everyone who's working in a global environment. So I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about what that's like and sort of the emotional toll that takes that we're having difficulty in the short term and what that looks like in a long-term scenario.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Carolyn. Funny you should ask. Even an example of that was just yesterday. I was clipping a PCOM aneurysm and it ruptured in surgery, and I found myself struggling and thinking, why do I not have a second suction up on this table? So again, operating with limited equipment, and I have other examples like that. I think as a surgeon, while at times it can be frustrating and certainly a challenge, I think it does, I think I can say it's made me a better surgeon, required me to be more innovative, more patient, so yeah, I think again I could give other examples. I forget, Carolyn, what was the second part of your question was what?
Just about what that looks like long term, more so the logistics of there's what you do surgically, but there's logistics of having anesthesia and the OR being available and the staffing and all the things that can be quite exhausting that really actually aren't even directly surgical. Yeah,
I'm not sure I'm entirely understanding where you want me to go with this. I'm sorry, I'm slow to catch on. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's personnel, and so much of what I think anybody involved in global neurosurgery understands is that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and it takes, again, as I've already said, patience. It takes a lot of people playing, a lot of different roles. But yeah, being here, I'm not just a neurosurgeon either. I'm the guy that goes in at the end of the day and counts my spine screws to make sure I have enough, and I don't need to reach out to somebody to send me more, or I have to sort of be my own HR person and go recruit people for our department. And so, yeah, it's not just about supplies, as I think you've alluded to. I don't think I did a very good job answering your question, Carolyn. I'm sorry.
No, that was great. That was perfect. Thanks so much.
All right, we'll just go down the list on seniority. So Nitin, give us any thoughts or questions you had about these talks. They were so amazing.
Yeah, well, I just did the exchange course, the AANS exchange course, where we got to go over there and see what they were doing in Europe for training. And that was my first time I really thought about leaving the US to see what people are doing outside of the US. And it was just amazing just to see the different ways of thinking. And, I have to say that I am certainly more curious and aware, and I've started looking and surprised to see how many mission trips there are actually for spine that I'm going to be going into. And I guess my question is for Dr. Rosseau: if you have somebody who's inquisitive and who's curious, but not ready to take the leap that Dr. Copeland did, what do you think is the best way for a young person to start getting involved and to help out? Because I think all of us went into medicine to help others, so I think this is an area for definite need.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, we all have benefited so much from having not only equipment, but as Carolyn says, infrastructure to support us. And it's that infrastructure that's lacking in most low and middle income countries. And I hope in my presentation, you started to see why, that it's really only in the last 5, 6, 7 years that some countries have even been able to consider investing in surgery. When I was a resident, there would be entire countries that would say, gee, we'd love to be able to offer neurosurgery, but it's just too expensive. And that was the end of the conversation. That's no longer acceptable, which is great, but it means that we have a lot of infrastructure to build. So one of the things that's really important is for neurosurgeons, for people who are clinicians, to be part of the design of healthcare systems and to have health system strengthening from within, not just from bureaucrats from outside, but from people working within the system. So there's a number of ways that we're working on that. So there are policy fellowships, and increasingly you're going to see bilateral exchange fellowships. But, as you probably saw, Nitin, you can do a world of good by just showing some people how you run morning rounds, right? The idea of an organized rounds and how you do that translates directly into improved patient care and so many other things beyond that.
Great question. Sophie, I know you have a lot of thoughts on these topics. What are your thoughts and any questions you may have?
Yeah, thank you. I've been involved in global health since I can remember, since undergrad, pretty much. I try to always keep it a part of what I do, because it's one of the main reasons I went into medicine and what I hope to do with my career as well. I have a question for Dr. Rosseau as well. For people that are getting towards kind of the end of residency that have been involved in global health and have, the contacts and know that this is what they want to do and dedicate their career to, in addition to our day-to-day surgical requirements, when you're looking at jobs, what is the best way to approach this topic when you're negotiating a contract? If you really want this to truly be a part of your actual work, not, have to take vacation to occasionally get involved, but truly, you mentioned Dr. Budka has an actual global health track, which would be that's obviously the ideal scenario, but I don't think most universities in the US would really, have that available. But do you find that more and more you can negotiate that into your contract?
I do. And I think, well, first of all, it's nice to see you again, Sophie, but those are really important questions. You can't make adequate progress if you're doing this on your own money and on your own vacation time. It's just not possible. So it has to be built into your job description. And your interest has to be in alignment with your department. So it should be something that you are putting, front and center when you're negotiating. And there may be reasons why your department or your institution has natural bridges with another institution somewhere else. And so you bring something to it. But I think it's important to recognize the huge value that you bring to a department, because I can tell you, if you take a show of hands of any med school class, not only in the United States, but we did this in the UK, every single hand goes up if you ask, do you expect that your career will include elements of global healthcare? It's not only true of neurosurgery, although it's true of every neurosurgery place I've ever asked that question, but it's of all disciplines. So it's young faculty like you will be who will be developing the programs. So they need you maybe more than they realize. Just in fairness, it can't be that, you just happen to love the Seychelles, so you want to develop, a program in a great spot to go diving. You have to find synergies between your interests, your abilities, and what the institution hopes to accomplish, but you can do that.
Thank you. And then I had a question for Dr. Copeland. Something I've learned across many outreach trips is the importance of education, and that's what I would want to center on, down the road. And so you mentioned the residents at your hospital, and I was just curious how long the training is there, because I got to witness the first residency class in Cambodia with Dr. Key Park, and it was pretty cool to see. But it was obviously just the beginning, and there was very little structure. And I'm just curious to see how in those African countries where they now have a few training centers, how do they measure, that somebody's ready, first of all, to graduate, since they don't really have organized boards or case minimums, all of that doesn't really work in that scenario, since everybody's experience is very different. How do you kind of decide somebody is ready to graduate? And then also, where do your graduates go typically once they finish their training?
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. So the training program through COSEXA that Dr. Rosseau and myself were mentioning is a 6-year training program for neurosurgery. The first 2 years are called the master's years. And as I alluded to, it's 2 years of more general surgical rotation. So orthopedics, general surgery, OB, these kinds of things, so that trainees can graduate with a broad understanding of surgical care in Africa. But then after those initial 2 years, it's a 4-year track dedicated solely to neurosurgery. And that's across all of the COSEXA training sites in the 7 countries I mentioned. We at Tenwek anyways have not yet had any graduates. Upon finishing their training, trainees do in fact take oral board exams. I think increasingly there's more and more rigor to the expectations of a graduating resident. And these are, really well-trained, highly qualified folks. I've gotten to know a number of my Kenyan colleagues, and they're great surgeons. So it really is a great training program through COSEXA. Most of the graduates from PACS, the organization that we're associated with here at Tenwek, often they go back to their home country here in Africa. But some, as I showed in that map, go to even countries not their own. And so that's certainly an exciting through PACS is, kind of multiplying our efforts, so to speak.
Thank you.
All right, I'll take a stab at a question. I have one for all three speakers, actually. But since they're related, I'll ask Dr. Rosseau and Dr. Copeland first, and then Kristin second. Dr. Rosseau, your graph showing the HIV, malaria preventable deaths with the surgical lack of surgical access preventable deaths, it makes logical sense, but it's still staggering to see those numbers. I wanted to get kind of like a little bit more the granular, like boots on the ground opinion of Dr. Copeland, and then yours maybe from like a little bit more of the bird's eye view of what is like the next limiting step in improving that disparity and where so many people don't have access to surgical care. Is it funding? Is it infrastructure? Is it a lack of interest by the countries where these people live, poverty? I know it's a big question, but I'm just curious if you had to put a handful of things, what are the big breakthroughs that need to happen next to move us forward?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. The first thing that was huge was passing that resolution in 2015, because now there's a biannual reporting requirement. And so no nation wants to report publicly that they're not doing a good job. So just like, it's kind of like M&M for nations, right? How are you doing with surgery? So that was a huge step. And you saw how recent that came about. They're still not really enforcing it the way it needs to be. And that's part of our work at WHO, is to enforce that. The second thing, money is required. It always is. And you see that there's no budget for it. There are two exciting things that are going on that are looking at ramping that up. One is through the G4 Alliance, our advocacy committee has been able to get $100 million in the US federal budget for the first time. If the current budget passes, and we're all waiting for it to do so, but if we can get it through Congress, there's $100 million for Samantha Power, the USAID administrator, that is targeted specifically to global surgery. And so that will start to make a difference. And then the second thing is through UNITAR, which is a United Nations organization, a global fund for surgery has been established. And as that's only a year and a half old, as that ramps up, we'll start to see more money for that.
Yeah, great. Will, what locally, what do you think is the next thing that you guys need to continue to improve this infrastructure? I mean, obviously a training program is very important, but I would just be curious to hear from your perspective.
Well, I mean, I would echo so much of what Gail said. I would advocate for getting involved. It's one thing to be aware, and but I'm of course biased to having people come and visit, and there's so many different efforts through FIENS, all kinds of other organizations that you can get involved, boots on the ground, as you said, JJ. But whether it's coming across the ocean or getting involved in advocacy, where you are, or assisting in raising funds, whatever it may be, get involved. It's one thing to, like I said, sit around and sort of soak up some of the knowledge and become aware, which is a great starting point. I mean, that's part of what we're trying to do here today. But yeah, to get involved.
Excellent. Anybody have any other follow-up questions? If not, I have more. Kristin, I want to ask you a similar question. I know there's been some wins on the legislative side, nationally, even on some criminal justice reform issues. Unfortunately, I'm not super up to date on the details of those, but I'm curious from your organization's perspective, like what's the next thing that we need to do to improve, matters along these lines?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the reason why I said the issue about the George Floyd Act was it did pass Congress, but then it went to the states, and more states than not, so they didn't want to participate, and they weren't going to fulfill the spirit of the bill at the state level. And so what we've been seeing actually is a lot of these issues, we get a lot more traction at more local state level than we do at a national effort. As we've just seen, that the Congress just can't seem to be as effective as one would like them to be. So we made these white papers for different, so we have a white paper for mental health for different states. We have white papers for adolescents and how they should be treated differently, and addiction as well. So we think it's definitely more a state by state issue. And there's been some small wins, but there's quite a ways to go. And then we just have been like asking for more training of not of physicians, sorry, of police on how to de-escalate situations and providing them literature as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think
could
it's
just
obviously a
jump
complex, multi-layered problem. Go ahead, Dr. Rosseau. Yeah.
I'd like to jump in because I detect the discouragement in what Kristin has been saying, but I think it's important to highlight the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, and the attention to equity has done so much for global surgery, because up to this point, there was a lot of neocolonialism in global medicine. I'm sure that Will has experienced or at least seen that. And one of the reasons why low and middle income countries are low and middle income countries is because of the colonial history that is their background and the way that they were treated. So what you are doing is really important, and it's helping global surgery. It's not separate. We teach courses on, equity and anti-racism before anybody goes to one of these other countries or gets involved, however they are going to be involved, because it's really important that equity proposition underlie everything.
I would add that in the news is a lot of the confrontations with police, and there's some divisive comments about that. But I honestly think that the psychiatric care piece, as well as the juvenile piece, are extremely important and probably not talked about enough. In my estimation. So I think thank you for bringing that to light. So all right, I'll open it up to the panel. Any more questions that we can come up with for our guests here?
I would say, Dr. Copeland, when do you think is the best time to come visit? Let's say you're in training or you're just finishing training. When is the right time?
I would say in your more senior years, I think it's probably the most beneficial, both for yourself and those you're coming to help. As a fifth-year resident, it was a phenomenal experience. I was here a month. In the first 2 weeks, I was with this visiting neurosurgeon. In the last 2 weeks, I was here by myself. And so, to some extent, it's a chance to sort of spread your wings and take on some additional responsibility that perhaps that you're ready for as a more senior trainee. So I think that's a great time in those later years, 5th, 6th, 7th year. That's not to say that as a medical student or junior resident, you can't get involved, but I do think, at least from a clinical perspective, you'd find yourself a bit more limited.
What's the best way for people who are interested to join you, to reach out to you, Will?
Yeah, my email address, I'm sorry, I should have put that on my slides. So my email is wrcopeland, COPELAND, 3 @gmail.com, and anyone's free to reach me there. Yeah.
Dr. Rosseau, my question to you would be, what are the thoroughbred 3 ways that someone that's in residence or a medical student could make the biggest impact from your perspective in international neurosurgery as far as getting involved? Is there just groups that are just knocking it out of the park that people should join in?
That's a really good question. If you're a medical student, join your AANS student chapter. If you don't have one, start one, and then get involved with Incision, which is the International Surgical Student Group. If you're a resident, get involved in the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. But there's also residents who are involved in the Foundation for International Education in Neurosurgery and Think First, WFNS. So there's an opportunity for residents to serve on the young committees as well as junior faculty. But I find that the best way is to reach out, identify what you want, if there's a language, an area, a specialty that you would like to take and share. It's all about education, really. All of this is around education and shared education.
Nice. Kristen, I'll ask you the same question. If someone's interested in getting involved in your organization, how do they go about doing that?
They can join our Facebook to see what we're doing for events. They can email us through that. We have a Facebook page and we have a Twitter account. They can get a hold of us that way. We always are looking for different leaders with different talents. Everybody knows how to do something better than someone else does. So the more people we can have, the more people that have different experiences, the better.
Great. Carolyn, I want to ask you the same question. How do you get connected with some of the work you're doing?
Yeah, I think that medical students generally will have like pockets of time, particularly, your first year medical student between first and second year, and then residents will have a research year. So engaging early and identifying, someone or a group to work with and targeting that chunk of time so you can really have a meaningful impact and dedicate some real time is my best advice.
Awesome. I know we don't have a lot of questions in the chat on this one, except for to confirm Dr. Copeland's email address. Maybe
I could ask a question to Becky. If we have I would like to know, I know there's like cerebrovascular traveling fellowships and there's this EANS exchange course, but what would it take to, get a global surgery traveling fellowship or something of that nature with NREF? Is there anything that you're aware of on the horizon for global surgery?
You know what? I think that's a call more for Joanne in her area. That's something I typically wouldn't handle. Sorry about that.
I can say a word or two about that. So, as I've been involved with the Cushing Scholars Circle forever, there is talk of having a fund like that. The logistics and the way that it's set up, really, it's a challenge financially. You need to get to a base level of $50,000 before you can start distributing. And most programs are really small. It's $10,000 here, $30,000 here. There's not been the ability to do that because there hasn't been the funding for it. I'd love to see that happen. That might be something the Young Neurosurgeons Committee could take on and say, we would really love to see there be funding for something like this. We know that the entry level is to get above 50K, and here's what we're going to do to get that ball rolling. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Let me know how I can help.
All right. If there's any other questions, we certainly have a little bit of time. If not, we can wrap up. I have a little closing stanza I always share. All right.
If you don't mind asking one more question.
Go ahead.
I just would love to know, Dr. Copeland, what was surprising for you? I mean, you were very involved already, but moving your whole family over there and being abroad, if you could just give us a little bit more of a glimpse of what was the most surprising thing of living abroad as opposed to here in the U.S.
I think in some respects, life's not that different. I think people hear, oh, you're living in Kenya, we're living in the bush with lions, roaming around us, and that's just not it's not how it goes. So yeah, I mean, we, there are challenges for sure. Internet, it's a minor miracle that I've been able to stay connected this whole webinar. Yeah, but no, our kids are doing well here. They love school. They love the opportunity to run around outside. I think that's one of the things we're grateful for, is that they do have the freedom to do that. There's a great community here, both of expats and Kenyans. Yeah, sure, while there's some challenges and difficulties, I would say for anyone considering either a short-term trip or perhaps a longer-term commitment, it's not as scary as you might think. Things aren't as different as you might anticipate. We again are able to get good food and have good social outings and connect to the rest of the world through great things like this. So yeah.
And if you're planning to make a trip out there, don't forget chocolate chips.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. We don't allow you to come unless you bring those.
Any other questions for the group? If not, we can close up. We can close this one down. All right. I think we'll go through our final slides here and we'll call it a night. So again, thank you all for joining us. We do have another webinar here in a few weeks, the origins of neurosurgery and lessons for today with the history section. It's going to be really exciting. Follow us on social media for more announcements about that and for the links, etc. And if you want to go join there's your thing. We also have a podcast where we collaborate with the Medical Student Neurosurgery Training Center, which we're having ongoing episodes. I think we're up to like 25 now or so. So please, if you have interest in more topics along the lines of this webinar, there's another good resource. Speaking of the NREF funds, we're still getting our funded that we have already going on, which is a Chris Phillips fund, who's our representative from the WFNS for many years, the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. And with those funds, we're going to be supporting, medical students who aren't otherwise plugged into organized neurosurgery. And maybe after we close this one, we can transition to an international one. That would be very exciting. For also social media, all these webinars are posted onto the NREF YouTube page under the NREF webinar series playlist. And there's a QR code if you wanted to go there, and you can follow the NREF YouTube page and see all these as they come up, or of course follow us on social media and see the links. We'll send out to Rosseau the link once we get it. Thank you. If you have any feedback, please let us know, and I appreciate everyone coming. Unless there's any new questions or comments, thank you all for joining us, and see you next time. And again, thank you to our really, really great guests and panelists. It was a fantastic time. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, JJ.
Thank you so much.
All right. And thanks, Will, getting up at what, 4 in the morning or something?
3.
All right. Very good. All right. Have a good night, guys, or day, Will.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.